We are going live. Stream! Stream, my little pretty stream, computer. Stop panicking on me. Come on, you can do this. You can do it if you think you can. Come on, computer. You can do it if you think you can. Woohoo! We're live! Hello, everyone. Let's see. So, first of all, that's ready. Today's I thought I would need it. And right then, let's see. We have John Shea. Hello. We have Peter Dawson. Hello. Carl Gasworth. Hello. Jess P. Hello. Stafford Thompson. Good afternoon. Sorry I've been missing today's seminar. Not too busy at work today, so had an early lunch. Enjoy. I'm glad you got the early lunch. It's always nice to get an early lunch. Eric Kaufman. Is this a live one? Well, if it's not live, then we have problems. Let me just see. Ow! Yeah, it's live. Shouldn't have actually pinched myself, should I? History of the Second World War podcast. Welcome. Hello. Stefan Pajung. Hello. Eric Kaufman. Hello. Calvin Gaswick. Hello. Latter-day Biplane is carrying on, I see. Hello, Dirt Squad. Hello, Shane F. Favourite captains. Oh, not admirals. Well, technically, Michael Clapp was technically because Commodore was not a permanent rank in the Royal Navy when he served in the Falklands War, although it has been since confirmed and sorted out since it has become like a permanent rank, was technically Michael Clapp was a captain. So, technically, Michael Clapp. Good evening, Dirt Squad. Good evening, Shane F. From a chilly, damp Snowdonia. Shane, don't take this the wrong way, but I have the concept of a warm and sunny Snowdonia. No, I know it does exist because I have been there when it's warm and sunny. Will never, never lodge in my brain. Oh. Hello, Rick Givasa. Hello, Albert Zaski. Hello, Donrick Ironhammer, an Earthborn Gnome. Hello. Let's see. Hello, Ian Carr. Hello, Jack Hunter. Jack Hunter, thank you very much for the pictures. You will see they have been used. Hello, Greg Stadowski. Hello, Dan Freeman. Gino 199. Hello. Oh, good lord. Okay. Peter Dawson. Hello. And, oh, good lord, we've got a lot of things coming out. Let's see. Ampersand. Hello. Haven't seen you in a while. Have you well? Let's see. Domar. Don't think I've seen you before, so hello. Boreas Real. Hello. AV Enterprise, hello. Sadmiral, hello. Stephen Richards, hello. I'm seeing quite a few of you in a while. Hello, the Plebiscite. Hello. Glad you could all join us. Let's see. Hello, Zachary Gherkin. After Drax's take on them. Well, Drax likes them. You're going to work out what my opinion on them is quite quickly. Hello. Brie Larson, your competition in this time slot has a cool countdown graphic with music. I am not going to be able to compete with Brie Larson in this case. So. Oh well. Hello, Dejan Gavrosik. Hello. Engaging Strategy. Hello, and thank you for being here, Engaging Strategy, because, well, yes, your pictures have been used. Captain Seafront. Hello. Right then. And I think I've almost caught up with the chat. Daniel Phillips. Hello. James Carter, hello. Greetings and salutations from Atlantic Canada, hello. Blue Ship Buddha, hello. I've been listening through the backlog of Viltrons episodes, and your reenactment of Renown going after Shan Horse in episode 23 was quite magnificent. Thank you. That pretty much is my entire sort of... This is the point when I'm talking about that sort of scenario. There is nothing on the paper, if you look at the paper, which says that Renown should necessarily win that. But honestly, the Shan Horse and Nice now, A, they have their rules of engagements, B, their own captains describe describe Renown as sort of looking like with all the smoke and fury that's coming out of her funnels, and she's really packing on the as looking like something coming out of hell itself at them. So, you know, combine that with a few lucky shots, and frankly, the Germans were going, there are things we need to be doing right now. We're going to go find out what they are. It's just safer for our continued breathing. Hitler might be upset with us withdrawing. We will be upset with us sinking to that thing. Hello, guy named Dan. Hello, Jeffy. Question 8. Why were the G3 and N3 not designed to carry the Blackburn, at least on floats? Because they had HMS Hermes, which was going to carry it for them. Hello, Ian Wookie Winter. Hello, Wesley Phillips. I don't think I've seen you before, so hello. Oh. Carl Gaswood, I posted an article mainly for the paintings on Discord and Media Ideas. Have you seen it? Not yet, but I'll go hunt it down after this. I've spent most of the day writing and rewriting this. Also, I will admit this now before my girlfriend puts this in the chat, because I wouldn't be surprised if she did. I couldn't find my copy of Warships After Washington last night. And I am going to start a new trend or a question on Twitter at some point, which is, where is the most random place you have found your book? And in my case, whilst I have found them in the fridge in the past, this one was found in the airing cupboard. Not quite sure how I put it there. Do not ask. Okay, do not ask. Let's see. Demo, I was in December and January, so busy, so couldn't be alone. But I was a few live streams already then. Oh, cool. Well, I'm glad, and I'm glad you're back, and I hope your busyness has paid off, or at least has been helpful and productive or something. Good evening, Thomas Golding. Hello. Ooh. Oh. We do need that, but at the moment, I would also like the show. So we put clothes in there to, after we've dried them, you put them in there to make sure they're aired and fully dried in the cold or damper weathers when you can't fully dry them outside. Do you know one? How do your book end up in the fridge? Well, I presume I was getting a drink of something, and I put the book down. Blue Shirt Buddha, we need a Dr. Clark Does Naval History Blackburn t-shirt. I'm going to have to look into that probably at some point, along with an HMS Eskimo t-shirt. I do keep considering the merchandise thing, mainly because there is a potential that I can design my own t-shirts in this. But mainly I'm sort of going to keep, talking with Drac about it and learning from him. Alright. Monday 1640, hello, and a book ended up in the fridge? Yeah, there have been many, many places books have ended up. So, originally this was going to be a 4-parter. It's actually a 3-parter because I combine parts 3 and 4. Because, honestly, the amount of pictures available on the N3 are negligible. So it was kind of like, there is so many G3 pictures in this book, in this presentation, yet N3 is like one slide long. Oh, fudgicle, I'd better alter this. Dan Freeman, I believe Mrs. Drac is a graphic designer. That is too much. She is a graphic artist. She is amazing. Jupiter, funny that King George V were designed to carry their own aircraft. Was Hermes too busy chasing pirates by then? Pretty much by that point, they had various roles for the carriers, and spotting aircraft was not one of them. Ooh, potentially multiple t-shirts. Richard Order, what unicorn ship actually exists, as in it shouldn't, but it does? But it was HMS Unicorn, but leave that to one side. Many unicorn ships exist. There is the, and I forget its name off the top of my head, but there was the CIA one which actually docked down and went like that underwater. Could sail along normally and then could go and swing down. And that was a deep salvage thing to pick up basically Russian submarines which had got trapped on the floor. And other Russian nuclear weapons which were down there. Stephen Bachung, do we know anything about anything certain about names of the G3 and N3 classes? Not really. I'm fairly sure I'm fairly certain that Drac is right, that the G3s would have probably ended up going the route of admirals, and I don't think though the N3s are going to go patron saints. There are other options, and there are ships which have been recently decommissioned by this point, whose names you can go and start to plunder. Instead of nine, Bruce Stein. Well, potentially. It's a glass which my family got for me for Christmas, which says, "This is Alexander's Iron Brew mug." And the only reason I've started using this rather than this lovely creation is because this holds more. I measured it. The Glomar Explorer, yes, I think that is right. AV Enterprise. A Bill Trunks t-shirt would be quite cool. I think it was the Glomar Explorer. Unless they drink what I was talking about. Right then. Dan Freeman, I find myself wondering whether the G3s would be considered fast battleships or battle cruisers, still by the RN, as that would change the names. That is an interesting question. But first of all, we're going to start off with the origins of the Dreadnought and where it comes from. So, as you can all see, the sixth one on this is Dreadnought, and this comes from the 1922 Institute of Naval Architects paper, which I was talking about the other day. And you can see the development of armor as it goes through. You can see the development of barbettes, and you can see where the armor's placed and how it sort of starts to dominate the hull. But also, you can see the changing shape of the ships. If we look at them, the first class are really quite short and stumpy in comparison to what Dreadnought is. Dreadnought has a far longer bow, it has a far more pronounced bow, and it has overall a far more smoother shape. Not the Glomar Explorer. No, there was one, but I've forgotten its name now. I'll track it down later. I've got a whole book on it somewhere. In-car, how far advanced were the Excellent-class battlecruisers before conversion began? Not as far as could have caused trouble. Mm. Jeff Miller, most sources I've seen and named the G3s invincible, inflexible, indomitable, and indefatigable. In part after the two ships lost to Jutland and the other two offered to Chile. That's a potential, definitely, but I'd reckon more with the Admiral class being cancelled, they'd have gone for the Admirals because they've already announced those names, and so those names. I think initially, if the Admirals had been built, then definitely Eyes would have been it. But you can't announce you're going to get an HMS Nelson and an HMS Rodney and then not deliver an HMS Nelson and HMS Rodney. Come on, let's be honest. A few years later, when they are building two battleships, they immediately have to call them Nelson and Rodney. And then the King George V's have Anson and Howe in their number. You, to a naval mind, and especially the mindset of that period, announcing you are going to be naming your capital ships for admirals is wow, yes, we love it. And taking it away can cause not so much morale problems as morale issues. Dejan Governor, well, we'll be getting to those. But as I said, as you can see, the armour changes. Then you have World War One happen. And each of these sort of battles deliver some lessons. For example, the Battle of the Falklands. It shows the importance of having something that's reasonably fast, can sail around the world, and mop up the enemy, for commerce warfare reasons. Melanie, it might not, I have seen your star one, but I haven't seen your other ones with the question name of. Don't have to track it down. I've been saying its name the entire time. The RR Flip. Possibly it is that one, but I just noticed your messages now because there are other ones that have got bright orange on them. Your eyes, when it's moving quite as fast as it is at the moment, tend to get drawn to the bright orange ones. Where's the book? Over there. It's in the Phillips Encyclopedia. So, the Falklands basically emphasized to the Royal Navy, yeah, we're going to need something to track people down with. And the Royal Navy's going, yeah, we can build something. The trouble is, first of all, they're building the Admiral class. That's what the Admiral class are being built for. And as you know, my favourite what if is to think about what would happen if the free admirals had been turned into free carriers instead of the courageous, glorious, and furious. Or just even courageous and glorious. And if the lovely Americans had Lexington, Saratoga, and I think the other one is Constellation was the third one. If they had all three of those completed as aircraft carriers, that could have been a very interesting world. Three large battle cruiser carriers on both sides of the Atlantic. Just think of how naval aviation could have developed. Decision. Hello. I've been thinking a lot recently about that the Nell rods, plus G3s, would have been much better with two quads forward instead of three triples. The extra tonnage that was saved to be thrown on engines would have been better. Trouble is, find a quad which actually works decently. The trouble is, with quad turrets, is they are a lovely idea until you actually start to use them. Practicality, with the engineering and technology available at the time in the 1920s and 30s, it's a treble turret is the sweet spot. So stick with the trebles. Scorpion 26-501. You think Japan would have tried to get another carrier at that point too? Probably. It'd have each been allowed free. Van Freeman, hence I said Lexington, Saratoga, and Constellation. I think Constellation would be a far cooler name for a carrier than Ranger, even though Ranger does eventually become a carrier. The name, anyway, I think Constellation would have been a cool one to keep, so that's what I tend to say. Ian Card, turrets were usually on the longer delivery than capital ships, so how far did the design of the N3 triple 18-inch turrets progress? Well, they tested a triple 15-inch turret on design, well, a triple turret design very similar to what they'd scale up to the 18-inch with 15-inch on one of the monitors, and it had been found to work quite well. In fact, so much so, someone actually at some point, because before the treaties, is considering upgrading the Queen Elizabeth classes to triple 15s. So we could have had a interwar modernization of the Queen Elizabeth class, which ended up with them mounting 12 15-inch guns rather than 8. We can all contemplate that particular joy now quietly to ourselves. It would be quite interesting. Then they significantly, what's the problem with quads? It's the stresses it places on the ship when it fires. It's the stresses they have in lining up, and they do make aiming a lot more difficult. And honestly, let's look at the implementation of the quads. You have the King George VI class, the KGVs, the King George V, and you produced on the King George VI, and you have the Dunkirk class, I think, are quads. The quads that there are have interesting times with their turrets. So let's just say there is a reason for this. And there is a reason why the most difficult turret for the British to get fixed and doesn't get fixed prior to World War II, which is why the British end up with a automated double 4.5-inch and an automated double 6-inch, is the quadruple 6-inch turret. They spend a lot of time trying to get that thing to work. And I honestly think that with enough peacetime they could have got it to work, but under wartime conditions they were never going to get it to work because it required so much science to get it perfect and get it viable. Jeff Baylor, converting battlecruisers is a good way to consolidate all your carrier tonnage in the fewest number of ships, though. Not really. It gives you decent-sized carriers. And again, honestly, if you've been converting free, the British would have probably pushed for higher tonnage. They were the ones who pushed for the... it's kind of strange. The British push for the higher total tonnage of carriers, but also the lowest possible individual tonnage of carriers, so you can have the most. So that would be, what the British would be pushing for. And yeah. At some point, weren't the G3s to get triple 15-inch, mainly because they would be ready sooner? They were going to get triple 16 inches, and they were going to be ready quite soon. And you have to remember, the 16-inch guns which they were working on for them largely form the base of the turrets which end up being used in Nelson and Rodney with some modifications. Do you know anyone who said Warspite with 12 15-inch guns? It will be fun. Tandering might need to pause this and go and have a cold shower and all that, lie down in a darkened room. I think about Warspite with triple 15-inch guns. That worries me slightly. Look, they had all sorts of ideas about how to upgrade them. Albazaski, you're not the only one who's thinking it's a good and sensible idea, but at this point, in the early 1920s, the Royal Navy starts heading for the 18-inch gun. And the reason they're heading for the 18-inch gun is Dogger Bank. Now, I would have to say one of the least well-studied parts of World War I was the Naval War, and that's largely because the Admiral of the Fleet, who ends up in charge as First Sea Lord of the Royal Navy, is a particularly short-sighted individual who I have known to have a great affection for, and he has his saving graces, although I've yet to find them. And he is very good at certain scenarios, although he does give up the fleet air arm and all sorts of things. But Beatty isn't going to let any history of World War I come out which is going to critique his command. So, the point he's going for always is you want more speed, more armor, bigger guns. That's the whole point, and that's what he's pushing. And so that comes through in the ship design. So, Bajang, and we all know how much trouble the Prince of Wales had with her quadruple turrets when facing the Bismarck. Yes, they were being rebuilt internally at the same time. Hover Lambo, hello. Hover Lambo, if they had a viable, tested, working 1515, what idiot decided to push for a quad 14? Well, I think it's probably the same idiot who decided that we're going to scrap the G-freeze and the N-freeze before we've even had a treaty yet. Richard Robert, there is a lever there is the lever cannon, a metal tube rolled in lever and metal bands. Do you think of this in the World War I, World War II? Not sure about composite material guns on these days. Steam Cross, read G-Freeze. I've seen some what-ifs where the Q turret was moved astern so it didn't do all the blast damage to the superstructure. Do you think that might have happened? We'll get to that when we start talking about design. At the moment I'm talking about sort of the World War I experience. Seeing Carl, were the weight-saving measures to the turret act used in Nelson's also planned for the N3 and G3, or were these designs purely a consequence of the Washington Treaty? You guessed it. They took a very good working design of a treble 16-inch gun, and then they decided to try and make it lighter, and it caused all sorts of problems. Hello, Cosmic Drowsiness. We're not getting into Project Katie today. Andrew Cox, so could we have had a 12, 15-inch Vanguard? Yeah. Steam Cross, really, the triple 15-inch guns, you'd have had to increase the beam of the ships to fit the bigger turret ring and larger turrets. Actually, because on the Queen Elizabeth class, it couldn't be done on the R class. From what I understand from the experiments, because they found this with the Lord Roberts, which has the same size turret ring as the Queen Elizabeth class, it could be done. But the R class and Renown and Repulse have smaller turret rings, so they couldn't. But the turret rings on the Queen Elizabeth and the Queen Elizabeth class could be upgraded to have the treble. Again, my source is one sentence in here. And that's what they're explaining. So I'm having to go with that. Warships After Washington by Jordan also mentions the tests. This book mentions the conclusions and the descriptions. Hello, Nautical Wolf. Melanie 1640, rebuilt internally at sea. That's pretty much what they had. You see, Prince of Wales sailed with a load of dockyard workers and basically constructors aboard her. And they were still having problems, so they're basically rebuilding the turret at sea because it wasn't quite finished and it was being used and wasn't quite tested, and they were basically fixing it as they went. Just imagine the performance of Prince of Wales at Denmark Strait when the quad turret issues had been resolved in the 1920s. Just go with a treble turret, you'll have the issues resolved. Just add a 15-inch guns. I'm not sure if you could stagger the guns on Warsprite, but potentially. Considering how you'll have larger turrets, and it's not necessarily a bigger hull. It's once you got a turret ring, it's okay. The main trouble they decide, and the reason I think they decide against it, is because of the ammunition storage, because they didn't have space to increase the ammunition storage if they also increased these. The guns. Shomak, the RN gave up how many capital ship hulls to use as bargaining ships between the Admirals G-Freeze and N-Freeze? 11. Jepila, does Sturdy take over the ground fleet if BT is killed and Jellicoe promoted, or if BT is killed, does Jellicoe stay with the ground fleet until the end of the war? How does that affect G-Freeze? Well, Jellicoe probably stays as First Sea Lord for longer. Sturdy probably does take over the Grand Fleet. You probably have Twit take over the battle cruiser force because he'd be the next in line to get to that level of promotion, because you need someone who's experienced the independent commander fighting the Germans, and no one's going to argue with Twit being given that. You have a whole lot of options that come through, but honestly, you probably have a slightly different approach, and I would argue Jellicoe's. I would argue the designs would be slightly more conventional layout than under BT. It's the 1929 Transactions of the Institution of Naval Architects, which has the mention in it of the potential triple 15-inch. I think. February, hello. What modifications would you do to the Queen Elizabeth class? Depends when I can modify them. In the interwar period or as being built. If it was as being built, they were working on a treble 15 at that time, I would have made them longer and bigger and given them treble 15s from the beginning. Jepina, for all the criticism made from Tiger, she was the only ship to continue pursuit of the bank, only breaking off because no other ship followed her. That was also because, if I remember correctly, BT signalled them to engage. It sent the wrong signal. It happened at Dogger Bank as well. Jim Cross. Apparently, one chap who was good, was sadly cut off, was Hood aboard Invincible. He's a common what if for the commander for BCF. Yep. It was fairly decent. Jack Hunter, if the QEs were longer, bigger, and had treble 15-inch, what impact would that have had on the Washington Naval Treaty from the outset? Probably been bigger from the beginning. Outbound flight. Would a QE with triple 15s be 4 trebles or 3 trebles? 4 trebles. JSL, quad turrets seem to have been the next design expansion of battleships, and had there not been a World War II. The US, I believe, planned for quad turrets in North Carolina before the escalator was invoked. Everyone looks at it, but it's a case of, it's a lovely idea in theory. It's one of those things, in theory, it saves you so much tonnage and makes it so much easier. In reality, if you look at the British have the quads on the King George the Fifths, and then they go for next design, we're not going quads again. No way. No way. The Americans look at the British operating on the quads and go, hmm? We all look at the French operating the quads and go, Basically, what happens is the quads look good on paper. Kind of like so many things in life. So many things look good on paper. What have I got? A great example of sitting around me. Alright, let's see if we can find it. Now I'm about to say some heresy probably, but I'm going to say this. On paper, the Yamamoto looks good. It looks like a very powerful ship. In practice, if you can only afford to build 2 of them, and that's going to break your bank account, and you can't really do any more, is it an actually sensible design? Yes, you've built a massive battleship, but it's only going to be available how often? This is the thing with the quad turret. The quad turret looks great, but it is so cramped to get a decent, especially when you're talking guns. You either have to build a ship which is going to be so big it won't fit through the Suez Canal, let alone the Panama Canal, to give the turret enough space, or you have to make it so cramped everyone's on top of each other and they can't maintain it. A treble turret is the sweet spot if the Suez Canal is your criteria. Dear Squad, congratulations on reaching your century in concurrent viewers. Hello! I didn't realize I had 100. Thank you. Evening, Thomas van der Velde. John Luke, good evening. How fast will the QEs with triple speed? Well, that's the interesting thing. If you build them at the same standard, they're probably going to lose. If you build them wider but slightly longer originally, then they would probably have the same speed broadly. If you put in the triples in the hulls designed, well, basically you'd need to do the anti-torpedo bulges to preserve stability anyway. So you probably lose 2 or 3 knots from the top speed, but that's not really going to be much of a problem if you've got that much extra firepower. You're still going to have decent battleships. Ian Carr, did the RN later regret not building more QEs instead of R-Class? Oh, yes. Why do you think the last R-Class get cancelled and turned into Renown and Repulse? Anything to not build more R-Class. What happened to our hairy Viking called Dr. Clark? I cut my own hair. It was quite a scary experience for both me and the hair. I didn't quite go to plan on top, but the sides went okay. Steamcross, weren't the French quad more a case of two twins slapped together with a big bulkhead between each pair of guns? Yes! Making them even wider. And more complicated. LCS looked good on paper. So many things look good on paper. Jeff Hitler, the RN ordered the hoods instead of more QEs in the end. Well, because they built the Rs, and at that point, then the hoods were an improvement on the QEs, theoretically. Yamato, sorry. Weren't 4 laid down. 4 were laid down, they didn't manage to build all 4. Hello, Bijan. The plan was for 8 R-Class, swap that for Handwaggle 6 Queen Elizabeths, build Argencourt, lay down 1914, cancelled as a 6th QE, and the Canadians to buy some. And you can get 17. That would be interesting. 17 Queen Elizabeths would have been an interesting uniform force. Tian Wong, don't confuse Yamato and Yamamoto. They're completely different names and completely different occasions. Yes, but I was just mispronouncing them. Boris Real, why do you call Yamato? Is this another case of shaft horsepower? It's a case of me occasionally jumping or pronouncing the wrong one. I usually spell them right when I'm writing them, but sometimes I get them wrong when talking about them. Ooh, lots of questions coming through. I know. Dirt Squad. No, he didn't. Yamamoto never sailed on Yamato. But I think he was on board at one point, but I don't think he sailed on her. Basically, yes. So then the Battle of Jutland happens, and as we all know, that has someday when Bilge Pumps has the time and the inclination for our special history research, we are going to have to do a full investigation on the report and the write-up for the Battle of Jutland and why the Royal Navy's report, the report that's eventually finished, is so wrong compared to the reality. Because they get some very good officers to do a proper report, and they don't like it because it's a bit critical of Beatty, so it gets rewritten. And I would argue this causes a lot of false lessons to be learned because people are going from the official report rather than the report. Now, here we got some upcoming stuff. And as you'll know, today's Washington's Cherry Trees. Bruce Ships 33 on Sunday. History, speeches and quotations. Long Patrol on Tuesday, submarine aircraft of the 1920s and 1930s. And 21st, live the Great White Fleet. Yes, there is not a Long Patrol coming up for this, mainly because As much as I love battleships, these classes are not my particularly favourites. I'm going to be honest about that. One. And we are now at... Well, that would say 45 minutes. Vision. Yes, Admiral Yamamoto was on Yamato at Midway. Oh. That just seems cruel. I always presume when someone was telling me that was a mistake. Oh, yes, he was one. There is also part of me that thinks that someone's trying to tongue twister whenever they say that one to me. Yamamoto was on Yamato at Midway. Ian Carr, it's the first version of the RN Jutland report in the archives. Not really. It's been found recently, not that long ago, but it's not in the National Archives. I think there's a copy in the Churchill Archives. Race Calmira, Cat, are there any standout flaws in the official Jutland report? Yeah, again, that's just a whole nother video. That's just a whole nother video. Right then, so we're going to talk. We're, of course, talking today. They are Citadel ships. Now, before anyone starts sort of critiquing or going, no, we don't refer to them as that. Actually, again, great thing is, I have the paper here presented by Sir William Berry, who was Vice President at the time, and was also a senior member of pretty much everything to do with these things. And he starts off with... Before proceeding with the Nelson design, it must be of interest to place on record a short summary of the history of capital ship design and construction for the British Navy between the time building HMS Hood and the laying down of HMSs Nelson and Rodney. During this period, a large number of designs were prepared for the consideration of the Board Admiralty, embodying the lessons of war experience and the recommendations of the Post-War Questions Committee. As a result of which, orders were placed by the Board on October 1921 for 4 battlecruisers. The shipbuilding firm selected being Messrs. John Brown of Clydebank, Messrs. Fairfield of Govan, Messrs. Swan Hunter of Wallsend, and Messrs. Beadmore of Delmer. These ships had an armament of 9 16-inch guns in 3 treble turrets and 16 6-inch guns in 8 twin turrets, and a speed of 32 knots, requiring a shaft horsepower of 160,000. The legend displacement on the basis of then in use was 48,000 tons, the corresponding standard displacement as defined by the Washington Treaty, being 47,540 tons. Their size was limited by the dimensions of permitting passage through the Panama and Suez canals, and by the docking facilities at Rosyth and Portsmouth dockyards. In succession to these battlecruisers, there was under consideration a battleship design with displacement of about 500 tons greater, carrying 9 18-inch guns and 16 6-inch guns, speed of 23.5 knots. Shortly, however, after the orders for these 4 battlecruisers had been placed, and whilst the design of the more powerful vessel referred to above was still under consideration, negotiations which culminated in the signing of the Washington Treaty took place. Construction of the battlecruisers was suspended in November 1921 before any work had actually begun, and building contracts were definitely cancelled in February 1922. As affecting capital ships, the relevant conditions imposed by the treaty... Anyway, going through all that, now, Article 2 of the treaty allowed Great Britain to proceed at once with the construction of 2 new design capital ships. The design for these vessels were prepared, and the necessary drawings and specifications made during 1922. So Eustace de Hennecourt, being Director of Naval Construction, the principal particulars of design as finally approved are as follows. 660 feet length between the perpendiculars, which is actually closer to the, when we're discussing it, to the N3 design. Length overall, 710 feet, which is far closer to the G3 design. Breadth extreme, 106 feet, which is the same as both. Draft in standing condition, 30 feet. Displacement, 35,000 tons. In standard. Freeboard forward, 29 feet. Freeboard amidships, 25 foot 6 inches. And freeboard aft, 27 feet. Shaft horsepower, 45,000 across 2 shafts. Speed, 23 knots. Revolutions, 160 per minute. Oil capacity, 4,000 tons. Complement as flagship, 1,400. One of the most fruitful sources of weight economy was found in the employment of D-quality steel in the place of HT quality formerly used by the British Admiralty for the principal strength members of the hull of heavy warships. Also, extensive use was made of aluminium and its alloys in the manufacture of minor fittings. But most importantly, the economy in weight to be obtained by mounting the guns in triple instead of twin turrets have been appreciated and utilised in the intermediate designs described, and in design to which Nelson Rodney eventually built, the triple turret was retained. 3 of these turrets would be carried on the stand displacement, and the grouping these turrets forward, the centre turret being superimposed, which had been accepted for the abandoned battle cruisers, was also in the Nelson and Rodney. With this grouping of the main armament in associated a minimum length of armoured citadel, to allow the maximum thickness of armour to be fitted, whilst efficient protection to main magazines could also be provided. This was a citadel methodology. So, technically, according to the engineers at the time, it's a citadels. This is what they're talking about. They're talking about citadel status. Synchros, I always heard that G3s were now designed in the 20s, and they'd have been a major leap in capabilities as the Dreadnought had been when she was introduced. I'm not sure about that one. Hover Lambo, would it have been better to build the first Nelson and then, realizing the weight saving, built an improved Rodney? Was getting both ships ASAP really necessary? Yes and no. It could have been sensible, but they were worried about funding, and it was a good way of employing people. Nelson and Rodney were largely an employment scheme to try and stop the slump in shipyard employment that had been created after the end of World War I, when there were no longer so many ships being built. Singros, isn't this Citadel basically another term for all or nothing? Well, all or nothing is about your armor placement on your ship. Citadel is about grouping your guns all closer to the Citadel and sort of building a Citadel in the ship. So it is kind of like an extenuation of all or nothing. It's taking all or nothing to a logical extreme, or a efficient end result. They were going to be having an all or nothing armament, but first let's start talking about this. So concentration armor so allows for a better thickness, thicker and thicker coverage, or less of the same weight. It allows the magazines to be in the center of the hull, furthest away from being hit. Oh, that's useful. And this saved, all in all, 1,800 tons on the treble turret designs, and that's 3 treble turrets, and 1,500 tons on the 4 double turret designs. Paul Ketchman, would the G3 have kicked the US into building fast battleships, or would the US have continued its obstinate hatred of good fast ships until the 1930s? Oh, it would have kicked them into it. They'd all had to build something to equivalent it. So here are Nelson and Rodney. And before anyone asks why there are folds in the sheet, that is basically me taking a photo of a plan printed and done 92 years ago. Very, very carefully. So this book was published in 1929. Which is why I'm very, very careful with it. This book is 99 years old. And, believe it or not the oldest book in my room is this one, which is 1919. And so that is 101 years old. Now, as you can see from the Nelson and Rodney design, you start to see there's something interesting going on here. You have all the guns concentrated forward, which is lovely. But you also have a problem in that a third of your armament cannot fire forward, despite it being placed forward, and none of your armament can fire or none of your main armament can cover a fire aft. It's all off at angles. So you either have to try and, if you are being pursued by a larger force, which considering the speed of Nelson and Rodney, quickly will be overtaken. So possibly it doesn't matter not having something facing the rear, as eventually the enemy will be in front of you because they'll be going faster. You can't really engage them. But it does allow you to have very thick armor covering the bits which matter. And it does also mean look at the shape of the hull and think about where the ammunition is stored. It's going to be very, very protected. Look at where the engines are going to be. They're going to be protected. Think about how short the propeller shafts are. That has an impact on weight. And they do have fairly good firepower in terms of their secondaries. They have six secondaries, 6 twin secondaries. It's a 6-inch guns. It's a fairly sensible system. And also, is sunk cost fallacy on topic? I mean, ships sink, so I guess anything about Citadels. Yeah, you don't get there. There are sunk cost fallacies, but not more. Ian Carr, were more updated Nelson class considered at the time of the KGBs? Not really, because honestly, the Royal Navy would have been quite happy to continue developing the 16-inch gun, and I'm fairly certain the other option to being pursued, other than the King George V, if they hadn't gone with the 14-inch, would have been 3 treble 16-inch guns, but they'd have had one mounted sternwards. And basically, the idea is often, it's a scenario, basically. We'll get to that. Ian Carr, did the layout of Nelson's and would the layout of N3 and G3 have much impact on tactics? Well, to be honest, it would mean you would have to pursue at an angle. So you'd have to either cross the enemy's T to get your guns all to bear, or be almost crossing their T. One of the things is, and this is going to sound strange, this is very much, I would say, arguably structured on a false analysis of Jutland. In that the idea was that at Jutland, it was a mass fleet engagement and they were going to cross each other's T. The main drawing the Royal Navy seems to take, especially as the 1930s comes out of World War One, is that Jutland is unlikely to happen again, such a large battle engagement, which is one of the reasons why the KGVs are built with this gun firepower all around. Because if you're going to be fighting task force actions, you can't always arrange it so that the enemy appears nicely in front of you off to slightly one angle. Effinant, why did they increase the caliber by just 1 inch from the previous 15 inch? Well, you know, one caliber works. So going up an inch, they went up. They're 16 inch now. That's not their caliber. Okay, that's their sort of their size. And by going up 1 inch, it does give you a lot more firepower. Decision. I think they actually look really cool. I would agree they look cool, but I wouldn't want to be. You see, it's going to sound strange. There's a lot of firepower, and if I can control the battle, that's going to win me the battle. But if I can't control the battle, that's a lot of firepower that's going to be quite slow to move around and compared to others, and it's not going to be pointing necessarily in the right direction when I need to be. 471. The 1931 design proposed for the end of the battleship Holiday, Design 16A, would have been a conventional arrangement of 4 twin 16-inch mountings. Yep. They were talking about twins, they were talking about trebles. Many significant. What angle off the bow would it be to open up sea turret? Well, let's have a look. Look there, you can see, hopefully clearly. If you can't, don't worry. I'm reading it off the big one. Ha. Pretty much, when you start to realize that they have 135 degrees of fire on either side, so a total of 270 out of 360 degrees they can actually cover with those trebles with the sea turret. There's you realize that basically it has to be 22.5 degrees off or greater. So 22.5 degrees from that position, so that's probably a lot more degrees off the bow. Jeff Wheeler, why was the G3's transom stern not carried over Nelson Romney? Wait. Andrew Cox, I have often wondered whether the all-gun forward design was an outcome of the state of machinery technology at the time. Seems with 1930s machinery, the all-forward design doesn't save weight. You can sort of get there, but there is... it's more a case of the understanding of the operations changes. Descott, was the system where the steam turbines produced electric power to power motors closer to the stern of the ship than the shafts considered? It was, but it's not at the level at which you want to trust your battleship with it at that point. It's not going to give you the power you need. It's rather like someone was talking the other day about a diesel battle cruiser produced jointly by the British and the Germans, and you're sort of going, not going to work. It'll be steam turbines because it's just not going to give you enough speed. John South, the issue of the lack of fire at the back isn't really an issue when you think about the angular momentum to keep in the blind spot at battle ranges. The enemy ship would have to be sailing at about 800 knots. It's more of an issue from maneuvering your ship perspective. And it becomes you're going to miss out on the first couple of salvos. And the trouble is the first couple of salvos are pretty darn critical. Yes, you're going to be maneuvering, but at the ranges you're engaging at, these become problematic. So let's consider. Displacement 33,800 tons in standard. And I got a nice picture from Jack Hunter here. They have 8 Admiralty free drum boilers. They're deploying 45,000 shaft horsepower via 2 gear turbines driving 2 shafts for a top speed of 23 knots at a range of 7,000 nautical miles at 16 knots. Yeah. They have 9 16-inch guns in treble turrets. They have 12 6-inch guns in twin turrets. And they have 6 4.7-inch guns in single mounts as AA turrets. Or AA mounts. Plus they have 2 24.5-inch torpedo tubes. I think they were 24-inch, but 24.5-inch. I have that copied down from that book notes. Their waterline belt, 13 to 14 inches. Deck, again, is quite well covered. The deck is between 4.25 and 6.25 inches. Barbettes 12 to 15 inches, depending on their position. And turrets 9 to 16 inches. Conning tower 6 to 14 inches. And bulkheads 4 to 12 inches, depending on where they are on the ship and what they're securing. It's a solid design. I just wouldn't want to be in it. Richard Order, what is your favourite I'm an expert moment when arguing someone? I don't usually like to rely on that kind of concept. If you have to say you're an expert, you're either arguing with someone who will never ever accept that they are wrong in any way, shape, or form, in which case you're wasting your breath, or you have lost the argument and are now retreating behind it to protect you. Admit when you're wrong. It's easier. In car, Nelson's did well to get 23 knots out of 45,000 shaft horsepower. I honestly doubt they got that often. Seriously, they claim to get it, but I think it's more often 20 knots. Andrew Cox, Freeman notes the USN looked at all forward ends in North Carolina, but concluded the weight saving was insignificant. Then the USN also had a rule for armoring a fixed percentage of the waterline. Yes, and I would argue that the USN was pretty sensible in that one. That's one of the problems with the G3 is they aren't armored on the waterline. In 1640, yes, they were. I think they were some of the biggest torpedoes fitted to battleships. Seeing Grace, for all the stick narrows they did well when needed. Yes, I agree, and frankly, the 16-inch guns were fine. It's going to sound strange. I think actually they are a very fine design, but there are how do I put this? I would be extremely happy with Nelson and Rodney if I could do one thing. If I could take this chunk, that one goes to there, and shunt it forward and move that turret back to about there. Okay? Maybe a little bit longer. If I could do that, keep their armor, everything the same, I would be absolutely ecstatic with that class. Would be absolutely brilliant. And my sole purpose for that is because when you're talking about fighting in the Mediterranean, when you're talking about fighting, there is a reason Nelson and Rodney don't often appear in the Mediterranean. They are Force H, they are very powerful ships, but when we talk about the Mediterranean, we don't often talk about Nelson and Rodney turning up unless it's a special occasion, then they're called in. They're not really something you want in the waters of the Mediterranean because of where their armament is. They have some of the heaviest air defense weaponry for any Royal Navy battleship in the beginning of World War II, and yet they're not in the place where air defense is the most important. Why? Because in the Mediterranean, things can happen very quickly, movements can happen very fast, and you could get caught out. So it's better to have some balance of firepower forward and aft. Confidential 12 zone. What do you mean armored along the waterline? Okay, so the Americans have a standard that all their ships, which have to have a certain percentage of their waterline armored, and this is to stop waterline hits penetrating their hull. And to be honest, the British end up going down that route if you look at the King George V and their belt. Going down. To all concerned, in the States, they want iron brew and can't find it. I get it from Kegworks. Cool. And hello to your girlfriend. I do know she's worrying that you're getting addicted to this stuff. Tell her, don't worry, mine has given into the concept that I am. I love her, dear leader. I do. If I had to pick between her and Iron Brew, I would probably pick her, but it would be a emotional wrestle. The drawback of increasing gun size is the square cube law on weight. Increasing the bore by more than 1 inch incurs an exponential weight penalty. Yes, pretty much 18 inches is going to be a lot. Manly 40. Biggest fitted battleships. I'm having trouble thinking of larger torpedoes, period, let alone with the fitted to battleships qualifier. The reason I'm saying that is I think was there a Soviet 30-inch torpedo? I'm not sure. I was doing some research into experimental torpedoes the other day for a paper I'm writing, and I could be misremembering, or I could be remembering it correctly. So I am not going to, but that's why I added that qualifier, because of my memories of that research. I was looking at a lot of experimental torpedo work, which went on in the 1920s and 30s. There were some quite big ones looked into and fitted for a short time to ships. Out of direct placement, how many more horsepower could be put into Nelrods if their hulls would be N3 sized? We'll get into that. So here is the other all forward, and this makes sense. You see, here is the other thing. If you had turned around to me and said Nelson and Rodney were also fitted with the ability to launch and take off aircraft off the stern, I would have gone, makes sense. It's the only criteria which means I actually give in on today's modern ships and don't complain as much as I instinctively want to complain about the Type 23s and various other ships, which do have an all-forward weapon system because they have the flight deck at the back. And I know about FOD and the damage that can do to flight operations. But Why do I instinctively not like the all forward? Well, there are two reasons. One, all the guns are forward, and if you therefore do get a lucky shot penetrating your magazine forward, you've lost all your guns and you've probably got a massive explosion. Two, well, at that point you're probably sunk anyway, but I think that accentuates it. And two, if you have all your guns forward, you cannot cover your rear. And you have to agree this is Dunkirk class. They have quadruples, quadruples, quadruples. Everywhere a quadruple. And you're sitting there going, not quite sure. And all their quadruples are double doubles, which is why their turrets are quite so fat. Dan Freeman. Kendron, is she watching? Possibly. Dan Freeman, technically, while technically it may be doctor's advice during loss armor, I don't think it's technically medical advice. No, I would never claim it's medical advice. I'm a doctor of war studies, not medicine. JB, Nelson Rodney also seemed to be Iron's design's most seaworthy in North Atlantic. How true is this? Well, on that one, I do actually have something I can point out to. Voila. This is as built, remember? As built, freeboard forward, 29 feet. Freeboard amidships, 25 feet 6 inches. Freeboard aft, 27 feet. So that you have the bow wave goes up to 25.5. Yeah, but you're gonna it's gonna be okay in the North Atlantic, but you're still gonna get water coming in lots of places. Honestly, they could have built a better design, and honestly, that is one advantage the G3s and the N3s did have. They were being good sea-keeping ships. They would have been good sea-keeping ships. Jeff, so your choice would be the change in the Elrod's line design. Pretty much. Yes, pretty much. The Dunkirks are lovely. What's in the space in the middle of the French quad turrets? That's because they are two double turrets. So they have in the middle of them a bulkhead. So, and this was done because, and here was the other problem with quad turrets, right? The other problem with quad turrets is if you only have two of them, and they knock out your guns, and they knock out your gun, it takes out your whole half your firepower, go. Whereas three triples, it only takes out a third. So the idea was, if we stick a bulkhead in the middle, then there's a chance, only mind you, that they'll only take out one side of the turret, and the other side will still be usable. Now, we can all think about, how usable would a turret be if half of it's already been blown up? We can all think about that one. We can all think about the reality that if half of your turret has already managed to be pummeled, the odds are the bulkhead won't have stopped it, considering the amount of explosive that would have gone off in there. We can also think about, I don't know, something particularly interesting, which is, what's going to happen to your turret mechanism that moves your turret round and balances it if half of the turret is on fire and has been blown up? Okay? The actual likelihood of this retaining any operational capability, if half of it has been blown up, is infinitesimally small. And I do realise that a lot of people laboured over it for a lot of hours to try and make it a viable system. But, oh my god, there is literally... See, the thing is, If you're not hit, it doesn't matter. It just gives you a lot of problems and makes your turret wider, and it means you have even less space to move around, because you go from having a cramped quad turret, which might have some space in it, to having two cramped twin turrets, which have no space in them, and you're going... No. Don't know. So it's that slow. That explains why it sank in SH3. Recall the action like more crazy no concept. Surface attack the submarine. Andrew Cox. There is a nice YouTube video on Atlantic waves crashing over a bullock's flight deck. Doesn't matter how much freeboard you have, the Atlantic is rougher. Yes. Doctor, Dosprey28. Hello. I've been considering purchasing Jane's. I was wondering, what information is contained within? Is it ship specifications like DMS? Yeah, Jane's is pretty much dirt. I have an original copy of Jane's, and I have lots of other Jane's magazines. And honestly, listen to... Oh, was it? I have quite a few friends who've been editors of Jane's and have worked with Jane's. We had him on recently. Simon, who does all the Roman history, used to work for Jane's, and it's really quite cool listening to him talk about his time there. Can also, how concussed are the gun crews? Well, that's the other thing. Yeah, maybe the explosion goes off next door, but you're in the other side of the turret. It wasn't the odds that you're going to be in any position to start firing. No. So you see there's a chance. There's a small chance. The Nissing Claudia, please tell me, how many feet thick is the central dividing bulkhead? Not that thick. Not feet. It's measured in inches. Oh, actually measured in millimeters. Oh, God, Lord. Oh, Richard, in service, the quad turrets were slow firing and prone to breakdown. Neither Jean Bart nor Riglu ever had all 18-inch guns working at the same time. That's also because... Let's put it this way. 3 16-inch guns firing, you can sort of produce a system which is going to deal with the shock on a ship and stop the vibrations causing too much damage to the guns. It seems to be a quad turret is just enough that you can't really. And let me put it this way. There is a figure here which says that the complement in flagship roll for the Rodney is 1,361, i.e. they could have 50 people of the Admiral's staff aboard. I have never read a single document from an Admiral staff officer who hasn't complained about trying to do staff work when they start firing their guns, i.e. everything on board breaks. Now, this happens on other battleships quite a lot anyway, because of the power the guns exercise on the hull. But on Nelson and Rodney, it causes a lot of trouble because of the placement of where the flag Admiral's bridge is, and where the gun blasts back and the shock enters the hull. So it causes a lot of fun. Anyway. That's another one of Jack Hunter's quite cool pictures, and I quite like this one because he very kindly took these all on his book, because one of my uncles nicked one of my books, on his camera phone, and it shows the subdivision up, and that's really quite cool. You realise quite how subsidized and quite how small the spaces were inside them. You also realise quite how large the torpedo flats were. Dev Squad, you mentioned the trolley idea on the Graf Zeppelin on Brew ships. I'm wondering if it was inspired by the system they had for launching spotter planes. Potentially. Take care, Andrew Cox. Josie on 100. Also, apologies to disorder address, but why wasn't more effort put into scaling down the G3s so they could keep the two guns forward and one amidships? What's the weight savings that significant? Honestly, the one amidships, it's going to sound strange. Swapping the Citadel round does really save weight. It does. Swapping the conning tower and everything and all the superstructure around does save weight, yes. But it does make control and steerage of the ship interesting because it means you are back that far from the bow. Imagine the difference in design philosophy between the Americans and the British on the placing of the island on an aircraft carrier. And leaving aside the fact that due to gas turbines and need to have funnels, the British have two on their two island structures on their ships, as do the Italians and various others coming up now. They always have them far further forward than the Americans. And this is largely because the British are worried about ship control. The Americans put the primacy on aircraft control. The British are worried about ship control, which means they move the bridge forward. With Nelson and Rodney, they have a similar issue. No, 64, torpedo flats. Yes, it's one of the name options you can use for the torpedo rooms. Ian Carr, why did navies continue putting wooden decking down when there are various examples of the decks being damaged by ship gunfire? Because it's cheap and it protects the steel decking underneath. It takes the damage. Plus, it looks good and stands up to salt water quite well. Looks good when you're doing parties. Can dance on it, especially if you can spring it like Jackie Fisher used to have his done. Many significantly. Also, weren't there elevation restrictions on Sea Turret due to concerns of not sharing bridge staff with shadow windows? Oh, yes, they did have all sorts of plans for that. Many significantly. Did he say gas turbines? I was talking about the Queen Elizabeth class aircraft carriers. Right then. So here's part 3. So here are the stats, which have been compiled with the help of this lovely book, this book. I mean this book. Sorry, I grabbed the wrong one. They're both upside down. And I also used. Not sure where, but 1924 has disappeared. But 1924 of these books. Well, 1934, 1925, 1926, 1922 sitting there, 1929 sitting there. Not sure where 1924's gone. Mother, have you nicked it again? I'm so looking forward to when my officers are coming. I'm the only one who's going to have the key to that door. I am the only one who's going to have the key to that door. No one else is getting a key. Anyway, so here are the interesting stats. I've got the standard displacement for them. And you can see the standard displacement for the battle cruiser, the G3, is 47,540 tons. The standard displacement for the N3 is 48,040 tons. But their overall full load is only different by 100 tons. Now, this is explained a lot by the fact that, honestly, the N3 is short. And I wouldn't be surprised if the N3 had slightly range issues. And honestly, I am annoyed that they only had two. I think if I'd been designing the N3, it would have definitely had 3 engines and a 3 propeller arrangement with at least 90,000 shaft horsepower. And honestly, I think that would have got it up to about 28 knots. That's 1939. Good, well spotted, Dunner Guy and Hammer. Well spotted. JV, how would removing the conning towers and adding transom sterns affect the Nelson Rodney? Why did they never get twin 4-inch guns? They never got the twin 4-inch guns because they had the single 4.7s and the 6 inches, and they didn't have time to upgrade them. It would have been good if they'd been upgraded. Honestly, a good thing would have been to upgrade them to double 4.5s at some point. In car plus 100,000 shaft horsepower for plus 8 to 10 knots. Yeah, pretty much. Because as your speed requirements go up, so your speed, let's say, is that. To get to here, your shaft horsepower requirements spot against speed go like that. So you might, the battle bridge on USN carriers is the extreme bow, just under the flight deck. Look at the portholes. Fun times. Sheriff Southwood, read James. If you get the originals, you need to get multiple years to cover a period. The World War I and World War II compilations are not well laid out. They aren't, which is why I buy the Brassies. As you can see, I'm building up the collection of the Brassies. I have so far managed to collect about 14 of the 40 or so Brassies. Hello, Carl Gannon. Turning 3434. Length of dock space was a huge issue for G3s, wasn't it? Maybe the N3 were reserved for small docks at the same time? Honestly, let's consider it. The length of the G3 is 856 feet. The length of the N3 is 820 feet. So 36 feet saved. Or 10 meters. There aren't that many more docks that are going to take you in. And you're both the same level of fatness. I'm sorry, both are 106 feet in beam, which is the same as the Nelsons and Rodneys. Nelson Rodney. Interestingly, they started building G3s but not N3s. Were they preferred? No, they just finished the design earlier, and frankly, the G3s were really the top of the range replacements for the hoods, and they knew they needed to get new battle cruisers. They had fairly decent battleships. The Queen Elizabeth class they had, for example, they were fairly decent battleships. The R class were the R class can still float. I'm very rude about the R class. They were honestly, one of the things about the R class is I don't think they ever have a time to shine, because the war they're built for, the battle they're built for, they never get to take part in. And this is one of the reasons why I say if 4C had been properly constituted with an aircraft carriers and had been arraigned at Ceylon, the R-Class would have been part of it, because if the R-Class had steamed along with some more advanced modern battleships into Singapore while the Japanese were coming south in the Defense of Malaya scenario, I think they would have had a big impact because of their size, their status, their presence. their actual capability wouldn't have mattered much as the fact that there are now 6 battleships there. Yowza! Rather than there are 2 battleships there. Hearing 2 have turned up. That's just a teeny force. 6 are there. Okay, we're going to need to send an equivalent force or bigger. Honestly, there is an interesting question from GC Friesen. Would it have been better to just give the N3s a miss and build more G3s? They were the more useful design of the two, being able to keep up with cruisers and carriers. You see, the thing is, and don't take this the wrong way, the N3s, the reasons they are so much is they are basically swapping shaft horsepower and pretty much, for more armor and 18-inch guns. So they're swapping speed for guns. And I think a compromise would have been keep the armor the same and have them 3 shaft geared turbines and 90,000 horsepower shaft horsepower. And as I said, if you got them going at 28 knots, which they probably could have done, you are probably going to be doing quite well. So you might wonder why they kept the R-Class when the battlecruisers would be more useful in the modern fleet. Well, because they couldn't build a 47,540-ton battlecruiser. And it was one of the things concentrated. As we've said, it's one of the things which were given up before they even had the Washington Treaty agreed. Basically, it was one of the things just frittered away by the British government at the time. In 1922. I do not know. They're idiots. They were insane. Right. So, that is their Starlings. That is their sizes. Let's have a talk about them. So, here is a lovely picture which came from Engaging Strategy. So, I'm not sure where he got it from. Or Engaging Strategy got it from. And it's the battlecruiser, G3, and you can see their armor line out. And you can see the cross sections, all quite nicely divided up. Now, you have to remember they had a very cool system of anti-torpedo defenses, which is actually really cool. So their first base, and this is where the British start using the idea of water as a torpedo defense and as armor against things, because you have air, and then you have a water layer. So it goes steel, air, steel, water, steel as your protection. And they also have the water tanks connected to pressurized air systems. So if the torpedo comes in, bang, and they start flooding the airspace, then they can use the pressurized air to push out the water in the internal space, fill that up with air, and counterbalance the flooding. So you can try and maintain stability. It's a really cool idea. What is the really big problem with this ship? The freaking turrets! Okay, let's be honest. You've got... Okay, take that lovely aft structure, move it forward, hook it up with a tower, which, by the way, looks like a Japanese pagoda. So, what they would have called the British equivalent of it, I do not know. What would we have called it? Because we don't have the lovely pagoda in the British, so it would just been the tower, and that would just not been as cool. And move that last turret aft, and you have a very good ship. As it is, you have a battle cruiser, which is really a fast battleship, which is. No! You ruined my ship! It's a lovely ship, and you've ruined it! Shermack, 2 questions. How many cruisers would the Iron have gotten if they had had the 11 modern cavalry ships hulls, and how does that subdivision on the N3 and G3 compare? Well, you would have got they've got a lot of subdivision on the G3, and the N3 is even more. They could have probably got an extra, probably a dozen, maybe more cruisers. And as I said, they could well have got the 3 admirals turned into carriers, or maybe even all 3 of the pair of the G3s. Because let's be honest, let's imagine those statistics, but powering a ship which doesn't have the armor or the treble turrets and is called an aircraft carrier. Let's give it an island structure as well. Yeah, now you're thinking. G3 aircraft carrier. We will rule the waves. 160,000 shaft horsepower. There'll be no navy to oppose us. Ah. Do you want my eyes, please? Well, G3 could have been 4 aircraft carriers. That would have been interesting. The Americans going, yes, we will get all 4 of our Lexington class, the Lexington, Saratoga, Constellation, and Ranger, as aircraft carriers, and the British going, yes, and we will get all 4 of our G3s as aircraft carriers. That has an effect on the development of naval aviation. Brian T would not want to be in the tower when B and C turrets are fired. No one wants to be in the tower when B and C turrets are fired, let alone in the 6-inch secondary arm, forward 6-inch. The idea was the secondary arm was split up so that one hit couldn't take out all the secondary armor on one side, but it just looks painful. JPL, one study found the Iron ships rarely fire their guns straight after in World War II. Yes, that was true. There was a study, but it was also that study focused on the Grand Fleet, and it focused on engagements in the North Sea, which I would argue is a bit of a selective study. That's good. Right, but as Dr. Marple points out, goodwill works better when you do it at the conference. It does. Gino 100. Clark, as much as I respect you, don't give wargaming ideas, please. It would be cool! A G3 aircraft carrier. Mm-hmm. For sure. So I had a good idea. I'm surprised. There are many people who have good ideas, and Richard, you do have good ideas. So 1920s British supercarrier, pretty much. Let's be honest. 33,000 tons. Probably British would demand it be 36,000 tons on that hull. Oh, you could get something pretty. You could get something so pretty. In car, our inventory. No, you see, that's the thing. With Courageous and Glorious, they don't carry enough aircraft to really make them still be queens of the seas in 1939 in many animals. But again, if you've got, let's be honest, don't take this the wrong way, but they'd be such big, such high status ships, you would have a rear admiral aircraft carriers would be made as soon as they enter the water, for starters. So instead of us having to wait 1930 for there to be a rear admiral aircraft carriers, there would have been a rear admiral aircraft carrier in 1926, 1927 at the latest. And you can imagine the British carrier doctrine would have moved on. Plus, you'd have had 2 of these with the Mediterranean fleet and 2 with the Atlantic fleet. Or it would just be our home fleet. It would just been, yeah. It would have been interesting. Take care, F-Ball 9. Okay, explain what the UK and the US would do with the carriers. What would IJM do? Probably do the same thing. Probably end up with 4 carriers, pretty much the same thing, which would be interesting because that would mean you'd have 4 pretty equivalent fleet-sized carriers for the 3 major navies each. That could have been an interesting scenario. Shumack, who would have been the rear admiral aircraft carriers if the position had been created earlier? There's a few options, but you might have seen some of the senior officers. One of the senior officers who was lost to the RAF in 1918 coming back to be rear admiral aircraft carriers. It wouldn't be unprecedented for an officer to have basically come back to the dark blue from the light blue. G students, so G3 as ideal Nelrod with rear turret and ditch the secondaries for 4.5s all round. Talk about cherry picking perfect ship using hindsight. Hey, this is a what if, and I could make it pretty. I'm quite happy to 6 inches all round and 4.7s at this in the 1920s. No, Dirt Squad. Did the government cancel G3 entry because they were broke after World War I? They're not as broke as that. An earlier alternate G3 design does have the third turret aft. Yes, it does, Jeff Beeler. It's interesting. And these are some various pictures which, again, Engaging Strategy found. And they look pretty darn cool to me. But again, there is a small there is a problem with this. And I see this coming up in World War II. I do see them. If you'd had these around going into World War II, there would have been issues with those center turrets. I don't think they would have been used as often as we might think they would have been. But they would have had space to upgrade, and they would have been fairly fast and capable. I certainly would not have liked to have been the German or equivalents who came up against them, but the trouble is, if these are in service, you then probably have a treaty limit which sets the treaty limit for any battleship construction at 48,000 tons. In which case, you are dealing with the fact that all the interwar battleships are going to be built up to 48,000 tons illegally. So if you've got anyone cheating, as they were, they can cheat by that much a greater margin. So that is the thing. If these survive as battleships and battle cruisers, and you have them, you then expect them to have bigger threats to deal with. Now, the other thing I put here is I've said the G3s, I call them evolved Queen Elizabeth class rather than evolved hoods, because when you look at it, they take all the lessons from World War One, and they use them to design the G3 and the G3 and the N3. And arguably, the lessons come from what was the most successful class of battleships the British had in World War One, and the far ships. Well, you're talking about the Queen Elizabeth class. The R class battle cruisers don't come in till too late. The battle cruisers produced before that mostly have a nasty accident in at Jutland. Queen Elizabeth class have a lot of experience. They're what you're basing it on. Decision. The idea. I'm not complaining. The idea is drool worthy. I didn't think you were. It would be fun. Thomas Gordon, quite glad this was never made. It would have ruined the British tradition of building aesthetically pleasing battleships and battle cruisers. I agree. Do you know why that rear superstructure? Because you needed to stick the funnels somewhere. Put the smokestack and smokestack in front of C turret. If you do that, you're going to have to move C turret back anyway, because you're going to have to move the engines. Remember, the turrets descend down. So beneath the turrets, you have all the mechanisms which move them, all the magazines, all those things. So if you want to move the stacks, you have to move the engines. Otherwise, you have to have a lot of trunking going around the hull, which takes up a lot of space. And if you're going to move the engines, and see, but this is why I keep pointing out, move that whole structure forward, connect it up with the forward structure, and move the guns the guns are as C turret aft. Thomas van der Velde and Jeff Beeler. Now, you are both right, and you're missing something. Britain isn't that well off, and yes, it doesn't want another world war. But one thing the whole country does recognise is the number of people employed in shipyards. And if you haven't got merchant shipping orders coming through yet, if you haven't got that sort of economy coming through yet, organising big warships does keep a lot of people employed. Okay, it's a very good employment scheme. So, if Britain has started mass ordering destroyer escorts, no. But building a few prides of nations saying we're using World War One experience to upgrade our battle fleet, look at the response to Nelson and Rodney. Those were very, very appreciated ships. Very publicly loved at the time and very popular. I hate phrasing it like this, but you also have to deal with the British psychology at the time. The British wanted to reduce spending on defence. Yes, they wanted to concentrate on spending on other things and setting up the initial parts of the welfare state after the First World War and land fit for heroes. But they also didn't want to be. You didn't. British psyche. We just fought a war. Some was quite a large population to preserve Britain's mastery and supremacy at sea. Building some battleships which would reflect, and battle cruisers and capital ships which reflected experience, would have been quite supported, because again, it would fit with the public psyche, the public image. The Navy wasn't necessarily seen as an offensive warfighting tool. The Navy was seen very much as a defensive tool. The Navy was the shield. The Army was the spear. Having a large army was what was worried about at the time. You have to remember, Cold War and various other things, and Second World War have perhaps changed the debate onwards. But we're talking in the 1920s, the Navy's still the shield of empire. Empire is still important. A lot of people are still working in the shipyards, working in dockyards, and working in the various industries which support them. It wouldn't be unpopular. And if you look at one of the things the British do is they keep the cruiser program going with the counties and various destroyer programs where they try and get going, and various other things they do, literally to keep the people employed. And that's defence spending, even though arguably they need to do that less than the capital ships. Hmm. Jip it. Need a Jip it. The RN does not need a turret off because the RN they never run from battle. Yeah. It's called the Mediterranean convoy, Judy. You need a turret off because you don't know where the Italians are going to appear from. Decision. I do wonder if the other nations would cheat by those margins. In theory, it's logical, but they also run into resource constraints as building bigger than that is much more difficult. You are quite correct, Decision. There is that issue. Melee 1640. You said you moved the stacks if you want to move the engines, but would you? I thought the stacks lined up the boilers, not the engines. They line up the boilers, but then the steam has to go to the engines, so you have to move the engines as well because you don't want to lose pressure in the steam, and you don't want to have the steam have to travel a long way to get to the turbines. It's just, yeah, it just let's put it this way: you move the stacks, you move everything. Shomak. Again, you're implying deployment was used as leverage to get things being built. The internet has told me that this was created by the evil military-industrial complex after so you have to be wrong. I would just refer you to the town class cruisers and the entire Royal Navy gamut to get them built. They're basically awarding contracts based on which shipyards have employ people in tight constituencies. I'm not saying the military-industrial complex doesn't exist. I'm just saying that there are both. It works both ways for politicians. Hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. And this is another cool picture of the G3, and I'm going to expand this for a second because, well, I'm on my second bottle of Iron Brew for today, so in a second. I have to say, for Vaporware, they do get some nice models made with them. Hmm. A picture in his hand. Well, it was back, but it's a good picture. I actually do agree with Stephen White here. Considering the low superstructure, if they had managed to maybe and this is one of the ideas I had, was keep the 6-inch guns on the main deck with the forward with a turret, but have the superstructure go aft and raise up C turret aft so it can fire over the 6-inch guns and has quite good clearance forward. So that would be sort of how I would deal with it. And maybe put some of the 6-inch guns centerline in the position which C turret currently is in. So you could have 6-inch turrets that could fire either side. Thomas Golding, I think this ship should be the flagship of the Albanian Navy. It would have been better than the Albanian Navy would ever get. Tom Humphries, which book on Taranto is behind you? I want to read one, but that looks there are loads on Amazon to pick from. It's the newest one. It's from Seaforth, and it's David Hobbs' book, and it's very good. It's got some sections in it which actually make Jamie's blood boil because they're not nice about the fairy Fulmar. But that is traditional with David Hobbs in that he's very, very not nice about the Fulmar. But it's a good book. It covers it all very good quality, in fairly good quality. Also got David Ragg's Taranto, which is usually smaller, cheaper, and quicker to read, but that's a fairly good one. Jack Hunter, I've read that the idea of having 3 turrets forward was made to reduce the amount of armor needed to protect the vitals, thus reducing costs. Is this true? Yes. We go back to all the way back to here, as I write in the Citadel, and this was one of the this is from the study which produced the G3s. The concentration in armor allows for better and thicker coverage for less of the same weight. Allows magazines to be in the center of the hull, furthest away from being hit, and saves 1,800 tons on the treble turret designs. That's 3 treble turrets, and 1,500 tons on the double turret designs. So it's fun. And courtesy of engaging strategy, this is the battleship, the N3 design. Fudge me. 18-inch guns. 9 18-inch guns. Look, I'm not sure what particularly a fantasy the third Sea Lord, Denicott, and Beatty were on at the time when they were considering 9 18-inch guns. The idea was that this would preserve supremacy of Britain over other navies, but what are you going to respond when the other navies end up building 18-inch guns? This is the trouble. The problem with building this is that you reach a certain point where you can't build any bigger, because what are you going to do? You build an 18-inch gun ship, the Americans are going to build 18-inch gun ships, the Japanese we know will end up building an 18-inch gun ship, so you can't imagine them not responding with an 18-inch gun ship. So what do you then respond with in your next class? 24-inch gun ship? Or 21-inch gun? Imagine that. A battleship, and it would have to be twins with 21-inch guns. It would have to be freaking twins. You could not do treble turret 21-inch guns. The weight of the machinery to move the ammunition would be colossal. So imagine that. 3 double 21-inch guns. And then, of course, this is the trouble once you're on this everyone's bigger gun kick. At a certain point, you reach a point where you can't build your guns and you can't build your ships to take any bigger gun because you just can't fit them through the Panama Canal or the Suez Canal, or you're going to have to widen the canals. And then you've got the Japanese who go, we don't care about going through freaking canals. We can build them as big as we like. And that's just going to be, oh. You know, imagine what guns. I'm going to check which one it was. So I don't mispronounce it again, because I tend to get the wrong one, despite me going out and practicing it while I was disappeared for a second. Yamato. Imagine the guns the Yamato would have had if N3 had entered service in the late 1920s. Imagine that. Let's be honest, they take 3 years to build, let's say. And honestly, let's say they start them in 1924, so they'd have entered in 1927. Imagine how big the guns are the Japanese would have responded with. Many significant. How the gun that's centered in the hull furthest away from being hit, shells do hit amidships, right? Yes, but they usually don't hit amidships. So hitting amidships is plunging far, and that's another reason why they have 8 inches of deck armor. "20-inch guns were built." Yes. Then read 21-inch guns. Torpedoes as shells? That's quite possible. Jeff Beeler, Fisher's dream was HMS incomparable with 6 20-inch guns and diesel engines. Well, diesel engines I don't agree with. I think that would have been silly. But 6 20-inch guns was quite possible. 6 21-inch guns, quite likely. And then you have, oh, God Lord, 6 21-inch guns. Incar, by what year was there any cooperation on warship design between the Iran and the USN? During World War II, occasionally there was some cooperation. Since World War II, not really, and before World War II, no. There have been not cooperation developing ship technologies. Yes, a lot of experience since World War II. Design, no, because they have very different design philosophies. Look at the ships which come out. Take care, Samuel. Juno 1 item. What of warships has Shikashima, 20-inch gun armed Yamato. Yeah. Osprey 28. Imagine if missiles were never invented and World War II never happened, paired with this infinite gun escalation. Results would be quite interesting. Oh my god. Yes, they would have been, but it was quite scary. Possibly would have had to develop a version of emails quite a lot earlier. What would it take to load the gun? That's one of the big problems with the guns getting bigger, loading them. Shomak, if gun size escalated like that, you might need to have reinvented the pre-dreadnought, as people would start using 12-inch guns because they needed a rate of fire. They needed something. JSL, why 18, not 17? Why 21-inch, not 20 or 19? Is it just have very far numbers? Pretty much the British go 13, go 12, 13 and a half, and then 15. So they go up by 1.5 inches, and then they jump to 18 when they look 16 inches, and then 18 because they're jumping up by 2 inches each time. And then 2021 is sort of where it starts to work out as. At a certain point, look, theoretically, you can get up to a 24-inch gun and it can still work, because there was some theoretical testing on 24-inch guns, but no. Jeff Miller, doesn't muzzle blast become a solvable issue with bigger than 18-inch guns? Jeff, that it's only unsolvable if you're worried about, deck crew. And there are actually options. What they tend to do is they tend to have metal flaps which come down over glass, and various other ideas they have for them, and also where you place the turrets vis-a-vis the towers. Not a goal. Would we have seen a reset, or would the impracticality be ignored? As long as the politicians are prepared to pay for it, it would have been ignored. Decision. While the guns can increase, the resources to build that stuff don't increase too much. You can't have a successful navy if you can only afford one scary boat. The Royal Navy could probably keep it going. So could the Americans, because of their economies. It would have been interesting in that you'd have probably seen. And this is one of the scary things. If you'd had that sort of defense, or that sort of non-violent but construction industrial race, that would have probably put money into quite a large part of the British economy. Might have ameliorated some of the crash to an extent. Not much, but would have probably taken it off. Might have made it less of a might not have quite so steep or quite so deep. Vickers do keep trying to push the 14-inch gun. The RN keeps politely declining until the British government basically forces them to it. And Chatfield. Oh, Chatfield. Take care, Richard Orton. John, look, how many shells can you put downwind with quad 1545s compared to 18 or 20 inches? Well, I wouldn't go quad 15s because, as we've been over, quads tend to have a lot of problems. So I would have gone with treble 15s, and honestly, with 15-inch guns, your rate of fire is probably about 50 to 60% greater than an 18 or 20-inch or 24-inch gun, because of the weight you're moving around in the ship. And this was one of the lovely things. This was made by ex-Kiwi Forces. And I think it's a kit-bashed nail rod to actually make sense. It's HMS Nelson, but if you notice, the citadel and the tower has been moved up. The guns, 6-inch guns, are still in a sort of relatively same position on the vis-a-vis the structure, but C turrets have been moved into X turrets position, and I think that makes a far better ship. I like it. Tianong, why did the Brazilians go mad on 12-inch guns in the Rio de Janeiro HMS Argenco? Because at the time, 12-inch guns were pretty darn good, and because it was part of the whole South American race going on. Oh, come on. Good luck. Adam Fenton, at what point did range become pointless? I.e., you can't hit X where X is. Pretty early on, almost. Pre-radar, this is the reason why when I'm talking about the 8-inch versus 6-inch debate, it's a case of, in the 1930s, the reason the British end up focusing on the 6-inch is because there is no real point for the 8-inch. You can hit at that range if you can see the target, and you can't see the target, so you might as well have a 6-inch gun and get more shells down road. Do you know what Brits just have to rebuild Warspite, then nobody cares, because they would A, not want to shoot at her and anger her, B, they wouldn't want to anger the entire British nation. I think Warspite is being rebuilt as a SSBN. Tianwang, why was the 13.5 chosen over the 14-inch? Because the 13.5 was available and looked like a good gun. Death Squad, as for reloading time, Schwer Gustav was a 31.5-inch gun. Fired 14 shells a day. Easier to reload on a ship, but the reloading speed would be embarrassing slow. Oh, yeah. Oh. Tianwang, and why was there two types of 13.5-inch guns? Three if you include the Aaron. Because the British basically, there were lots of designs being produced of 13.5-inch guns. Ronnie was pretty much trying to buy just one, and then they decided to buy all the foreign-built construction in British yards at the time, beginning of World War I, to quickly grow the size of the Grand Fleet. Samuel, would the reliability issues of the quad turrets not severely hinder the proposed super town with the 16 6-inches? Well, yes and no. In that the plan for the super towns with the 6-inch turrets was actually with a 6-inch gun. And this is going to sound strange. It's the only one which could actually make the biggest one which could probably make the quads work. There is a reason I say this: the lightness of the shells. Half the trouble of bigger guns than that is the machinery you need to start moving shells. So a 6-inch shell you do not move by hand, but it's the lightest one you move by machine, and you use machines to move them. And therefore it requires the lightest work. So that's why you can keep up the rate of fire. That's why they're as capable as they are. So you can do that with a quad. Once you're getting bigger than the 6 inches, though, problems start to build in. You can do a quad 8-inch and probably get it working quite happily. Once you're going above your quad 14-inch, you then got problems. Quad 15-inch, oh, quad 16-inch, quad 18-inch, oh my god. It's cumulative. Ben on War Spiders and SSBN worries me. It worries me a lot. You're not the only one. I think we could see a return of big secondary batteries, like 12 to 14-inch secondaries if you have 24-inch guns. Oh, yeah. That would be the only way they could actually keep up a rate of fire, which would actually be worthwhile. The problem with these gun sizes are weights and the barrel strength. For a 45 caliber 20-inch gun, the barrel length is 75 feet, preclusive due to barrel drop. Oh, it's gonna be, it would have been interesting. Look, I'm not saying in any way, shape, or form that I would consider these reliable systems, but they would be built because it would turn into a competition. Wrong. Improvements in design, basically. John Luke, would the RN actually be willing to fall back to a greater number of smaller caliber guns if the N3 escalation had taken place. N3 back to Super Lions, packing 15 or 16 inches and running 30 plus knots. I wouldn't be surprised if you'd ended up with 9, 15, 16-inch guns. But it would depend on what other navies did. If other navies started churning out every battleship with 18-inch guns, then they would probably be forced to keep it the same. I'm curious why the Navy didn't carry on developing and building 16-inch guns after Norad. No treaties covered gun design and build, and then, oh, look what we have over there. Yeah, it basically is funding issues with the Treasury and the Admiralty arguing over it. Then I now see Yamato being reclassified as a light cruiser. Yeah, that's a problem. JSL probably shouldn't get you started on the sextuple guns on one of the Tillman designs. Don't you? Kind of silly question. For a battleship designed to carry, let's say, 8 31.5-inch guns, how big would the ship be and how many aircraft bombs torpedoes would need to be sunk? Depends who build it, but it would be big. We're probably talking... Tillman range, 80,000 tons more than likely, maybe more. And yeah, it would be big. You need to widen the Suez and Panama canals for it to fit. Carmen, have you seen a Tank Museum January sale? I think there's a few books there for you. Also, one of my one on MTB is only $3.99. Ooh, I might have to look that up. I'm trying to avoid these sales at the moment. I'm saving the money for the bookshelves, but you know, the sheds, the garden offices still haven't arrived. They're coming, but they haven't arrived yet. So, I hope you realise that the whole way through I've been sort of answering the question is what would their effect have been on World War II? Well, their effect if they'd been built would have been a whole new class of battleships built in the interwar period. And that would have had a massive impact on World War II. Or, alternatively, the G3s would have become aircraft carriers. And that's a whole different impact on World War II. Because if the G3s become aircraft carriers, you're pretty much at a point at which you're starting the conversion. You've got the hulls and you've got the engines ordered. So they're going to have the 160,000 shaft horsepower. They're going to have the four turbines, the 4 shafts arrangement. But anything above engine rooms will be changed around. They'll have very minimal armor. Probably just sort of probably will still have a steel flight deck, knowing the British, because they did like that idea as it's being a strength deck quite early with Hermes, and they had it confirmed by Ark Royal, so they'd probably gone with that. Plus, it allows you to land and take off heavier aircraft, and they were always looking at the speed of aircraft growing. Honestly, I think if the G3 survives World War II, in the climate, the most reasonable explanation they'd survive would be as aircraft carriers under those treaties. So you end up with them having, each nation now having 4 rather than 2 33,000 ton or 36,000 ton aircraft carriers. I think that has an impact on World War II. I think that has an impact on the way you approach naval aviation in the 1920s and 30s, and I think that has a big impact on World War II. I think if they did survive as battleships and battlecruisers, then I would expect there to be a lot more battleships and battlecruisers. And as I said, I would expect there to be a lot of 18-inch gunships in World War II from the very beginning. You see one new super pre-dreadnoughts, 4 20-inch gun, 21-inch guns in twin turrets, fore and aft, and a light secondary of 4 twin 8-inch turrets on either side. Maybe 50 quad bofors. I think you'd more likely see a Sex 2 pull system where you'd have set of 3 twin turrets. 6 guns is what you really need to start getting a battery and get to work out the salvo thing. So I don't think they'd have gone below 3 twin turrets. And it would have been interesting times. JP, I thought Tillman's were Panamax ship designs. They were, but I still think for them to practically... They would have fit through the Panama Canal, but just... Danny Holmes, why did no one go for double stack guns on a single turret, other than the obvious elevation problems? The weight problems. But double stack could have been interesting. Stopping barrel drooping for starters. Samuel, when you see discussion about G3 and M3, sometimes you see people talking about M3. What was the difference? What was that? If you, sorry, I mentioned this. M3 was one of the earlier iterations that lead to N3. So basically, what happens is they work down the alphabet to G, and they work up the alphabet to N. In card, G3 carriers need a series of modern aircraft. They would need so many things. Carmen, what do you think of the manuals Haynes make on tanks and ships and planes? They're cool. Then the fun of post-war in that they could be conceivably be better than the Victorious for a fast jet conversion. Oh yes, and considering their shaft horsepower, they'd probably still be fast enough to give jets quite a decent launch. Vision, how would they have fared against the South Dakotas either 1920s or 1940s? I think the G3s would have probably had an edge in a free-flowing battle, but I think if someone had tried a full-on battle, I think... It's going to sound strange. If you're talking about a one-on-one match, I would take a South Dakota probably over a N3. But if you're talking about a fleet action where both sides are part of the fleet, I would probably take an N3 over a South Dakota because of its armor, and that means if you're dealing with fleet action, you can't rapidly maneuver and get away from them, and they're fast enough to keep up with the slowest battleships of the US. And G3 would probably do quite well. Don't you? So as carriers, the G3s would have gotten the US to maybe design and go straight to the midways, or went for something like Forrestal's. John Shea, if the G3s had been carriers, then you would have had Lexington, Saratoga, Constellation, and Ranger probably as carriers as well. So that would have been the US answer. More Lexington, Saratogas. So for a class of 4 Lexington class carriers. Hello. Washington Treaty on Unemployment. Did anyone suggest restricting the number of ships to be built to a standard at once? That could have helped control escalation, costs, and ease unemployment. I think some people worked for those ideas. What's interesting is that, unfortunately, one of the real people who put forward the two big people who put forward naval armaments treaties in Britain and America in the pre-World War I stage are Teddy Roosevelt and Winston Churchill, and neither of them are, well, Roosevelt's dead and Churchill's not in government, not really as powerful in government as he used to be. In the early 1920s, he's not a member of the government in that time in the Washington Treaty. So the thing is, well, that's a later treaty he's not a member of. The thing is, it's kind of the early concepts. People have taken up the idea of it, but they haven't really done the thinking of it. They're just doing a naval treaty because they don't want what happened to pre-World War I to happen. So it's kind of interesting in that the people who've actually fought through a sensible naval treaty and who proposed the idea of a naval treaty aren't involved in the discussion. People who are involved in the discussion have heard the phrase, the catchline naval treaty, but aren't really thinking, haven't really thought it through, so don't really know what they're asking for. Nautical Wolf, as would aircraft have been effective such heavily armed ships at the time? Not immediately after World War I. JP, apparently due to deeper drafts, the Panama Canal can handle bigger ships than the Suez Canal. Suez Canal can handle wider ships. JP can handle deeper ships. It's an interesting times. In car, would G3 Lexington carriers have been larger than Lexingtons? Let me just remind myself. Well, I think they would have been about the same size. They would have certainly been the same beam. And seeing as in their battle cruiser form, the G3s are 856 feet. I think their aircraft carrier form would probably been about 880 feet, so probably been about the same length as the Lexington Saratogas. I doubt they'd have had the 8-inch guns, though. They would have probably had some 6-inch guns placed on them. Knowing the British, they'd have probably ended up with four twin 6-inch turrets on either side, which would be fun. And 4.7. So they probably had the same secondary armament as their primary gun armament and the same anti-aircraft. So they've had 6 single 4.7-inch guns as well, and those various 40mm fitted. So final one. Okay, it's a bit ridiculous, but we're in La La Land anyway right now. So I just thought I'd love to see nuclear propulsion to a Dunkirk and adding nuclear shells. No, you wouldn't. That would not be a fun thing to see. Danny Phillips, how many swordfish on a G3? A lot. You'd definitely be talking about a 72 under the British Standard Aircraft Air Group. So that's 12 flights or 6 squadrons. So you'd probably be looking at 6 flights of swordfish, so 36 swordfish. And probably, if you're talking about a pre-World War II armament, you're probably looking 18 full Mars, 18 skewers, and 36 swordfish. Roosevelt and Churchill. Oh, the irony. Yeah, there is an irony about that. Teddy Roosevelt and Winston Churchill. Two of the ones who proposed pre-World War One talk about it and do a lot of work in it. Jed Bieler, we've answered this one several times. How many G3 carriers would have been lost hunting U-boats or hurrying home for the Command Marshal as air group commander? The point that is made is that these would have been so much bigger ships. The thing is, because Courageous and Glorious were still technically considered light cruiser commands, they got A, slightly more junior captains, even though they've been turned into truck carriers, and B, it affects how they're employed. If you have 4 battle cruisers of that size become aircraft carriers, and you have 2 in the Mediterranean fleet and 2 in the home fleet, you probably end up with a rear admiral aircraft carriers in both the Med and the home fleet to look after those 2 ships because they'd be so big and so important. If you end up with 2 rear admiral aircraft carriers in 1927, 1926, 1927, probably even maybe even as early as 1925, considering they're being built in 1922, they'd be probably finished by 1925. You would have a very different Royal Navy approach to naval aviation by World War II. If you've had 2 rear admiral aircraft carriers, you've had 2 staffs, you've had the fleet action, the approach to naval aviation would have been very different. Those carriers would certainly have never been contemplated for anything like that. And as for them going home solo, again, it's unlikely because they would have been demanded an escort. They would have been the status ships. You have to remember, the carriers, when they first enter service, especially the conversions, have the status of the ship they are converted from in so many ways. Okay? So this matters. And Alex and Flinton. Curious, I was equipped with 10 nuke shells, pre-positioned to be a broadside plus a spare. One wonders what would have looked like. Not a very fun thing to be on the receiving end of. Dubsby 102, an 880-foot G3 carrier would have needed expanded dry docks. No, she could sort of fit. They had them for them. You have to remember that we're talking the length of the thing as a battle cruiser is 856 feet, and that's able to be gunning with space to spare. And so battleship, aircraft carrier's overall length is, especially if it's on a continuous flight deck, which is what I was talking about, because that's the nearest comparison I can do to the Saratogas and Lexington's. Lexington Saratoga is 888 feet, so we'd probably be talking 80 feet because you're that much higher, because you'd have to add on a hangar deck, which would be quite high, and building up for various other things, probably over the main over what would be the main deck in battlecruiser form, and so with the flight deck over that, hangar deck, lifts, and various shops and spaces that they did put in for aircraft, plus the accommodation for the crew. As I said, it's only an extra 24 feet, which sounds like a lot in terms of length, but isn't really a lot when you start sort of working out in terms of meters. It's not a lot. It's 3 1/3 feet going to a meter, roughly. Well, no, 3 feet 4 inches going to a meter, and you'd be so 10 feet equals 3 meters, so you'll be talking, let's see, 7 meters and a bit longer. No, it's not going to require that much effort. Carmen, what would Bismarck look as a result? If you're talking about a carrier version of the G3, Bismarck probably wouldn't have looked much different. If you're talking about a battle cruiser version of G3, Ian Carr, 2 G3 carriers at Taranto, and Italy probably leaves the war. Italy probably does. Yeah, definitely. The strike will be massive. Seaman would have been 4 Lexington, 2 Pacific and 2 Atlantic, but probably rotated to Pacific if Japan would have finished Tatago or its sister ship. It's after it's damaged in the earthquake. Yep. So yes, and that would have been an interesting scenario. Imagine the Americans have 4 carriers of that size in the Pacific from the interwar years to the Pacific. That could have an impact on Coral Sea and Midway for both sides. Ian Carr, would G3 carrier probably have had the appearance of Glorious Courageous initially they were flying off deck? Potentially, but doubtful. Doubtful, because they'd have been built from the thing up. So they also might well have had deck edge lifts put in rather than internal lifts. Could well have had deck edge lifts put in, which would again change the size of the British aircraft. Anyway, I'm going to say any last questions, and then I'm going to go downstairs and have some tea, because so far today I am running on iron brew and a nice load of chicken nuggets. Someone in my family got a McDonald's and I got a whole box of chicken nuggets. So it was a 20 box of chicken nuggets, but that's basically what I'm running on. So I've got a pizza downstairs, so I'm going to stick that in the oven. Jeff Wheeler, what would have been the value of N3s in World War II? More Rodney and Nelson, basically. They would have been the same value as them, pretty much. Benora, thanks. I should add there is more steel framework up for the expansion shed for Twin Islands. Glad to hear it. There, Scott, why is the meaning of life 42? Well, for that you will need to read page 96 in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. John South, the G3 carrier would still be able to fit in the Gladstone dock at Liverpool. Yep. Daniel Phillips, how would you have deployed the other carriers, assuming they are built with the G3 carriers? If you still have Courageous and Glorious, then you probably have one of those with each of the home and Atlantic fleet. Furious probably stays with the home fleet. Maybe goes out to... You see, you might deploy one of them out to the Indian Ocean. And Hermes and Eagle are probably on permanent China station. Gonzalez, when are we going to hear about your Beltram's guest speakers? Well, we're making our final decision tomorrow while we're recording Beltram's. We're literally going to do the debate live on air. That's the plan for tomorrow's Beltram's. I will, Carl Gansford, I will take a look at them. Good night at those pictures. I'm looking forward to them. I do know you have to mention the Adriatic. Take care, everyone. Take care, everyone. Thank you very much for being here, and I hope you enjoyed. Thank you, Stephen White. Thank you, Daniel Freeman. Thank you, DGV40, Daniel Phillips, Jess P, Melanie 16040, Michael Truett, Jeff Beeler. Thank you. Dunrick Arman, thank you. Sadron, thank you. Jeff Beeler, what would the World War II role of G3s as battlecruisers have been? Same as Hood, basically, running around the world trying to catch everything. That's what we want to do. Pretty much anything would fit in Gladstone. Yeah. But the Royal Dockyard decks are limited to about 160 feet length. Mm-hmm. Yes, but if it's 888 feet overall, that's length at the top of the flight deck, not at sinks, so they can sort of overhang. I've seen them do that in the dry docks. It's not really fun to look at. You get quite scared, but it's there. It's viable. Right, take care, Stephen White, Bale Nora, thank you, Bill Bolton, thank you, Race Car Mirka, thank you, Samuel, thank you, Juno One, thank you, Evan Hunt, thank you, take care, and Dan Freeman, thank you, take care, Dusby 102, good, take care, Blue Ship Buddha, thank you, Thomas Vanderbilt, thank you, Andrew Ben, thank you, and Zachary Gherkin, thank you, everyone, take care.